Hello everybody. Today we want to continue to talk about the constructors in Java and how are they related with the attributes initialization. Uh, if you didn't see my previous video about constructor chaining, I invited you to do so at this time because um, in this video it will be a requirement to understand the chaining of the constructors because of this line here. If you are comfortable with this, it's okay for you to see this video. So let's see this class called point2d, which has two attributes which are private, and we have two constructors. And I want to show you how Java behaves regarding the attribute initialization. When Java creates an object from a class, the first thing he has to do is to allocate memory, as you know, in the heap, take the reference and assign to a variable. In our example, which should be something like this P0 will receive a reference to the new space instantiated by the in the heap. And Java knows how to do this because of this new keyword. But the construction only finishes when a constructor um, is called at the end. So first the memory is initialized. Uh, for sure, at minimum, it will need at least 8 bytes to keep these uh, x and y values in each object, and other information it said that for instance, there is some bits regarding with lock and other things that will be addressed in future videos. But returning to the constructors and attributes, so we have this x and y here, and we have two constructors, and we have a chain here to understand some of the peculiarities of the Java regarding the initialization. Let's start with a simple one. Let's say we decide which by this constructor to be our main constructor, the principal one. And again, I explained this in more detail in my previous video about constructor chaining. So if I write here something like 1 and execute, and you can see that it writes the default values. Usually the default values are the default values associated with the data type. The data type is int, so it's a number, a native number, and 0 will be the value assigned to the x, and y when the space is allocated in the heap. But as I said, we only receive the reference after at least one constructor was called, and this constructor was called, and we can see that the first value of x it's 0. We don't have here any 0. Of course, if I write 1, it will be 1, but since we didn't write any value, it is 0 by default. And then we just assign here a new value, which is 1 to x and 1 to y, and we system out these values, and we can see that it's 1 1. Now let's call the other constructor. And in this constructor, we are doing a chaining, meaning that to create this object, I will require to call another constructor, which is our main constructor, the one that really initialize our object. And that's the one that we executed a few seconds ago. And we expect to see the same output, but then we will change the x and the y here, and we print these values. Let's see what happens. Run Java application, and we can see that we call this constructor, it jumps to this constructor. It seems like delegating the construction to another constructor, and this is very important what I said about this delegation. And it writes 0 0 as expected. Again, the changes here, since we are using 0 0 as parameter, so even after changing the values, it will be still 0. Then it will return to the next line. As you know from my previous video, these lines are always after this constructor chaining. You cannot put a line before. Then I will change to 2, and we output, and we can see that we have 2 2. This is common stuff and we understand. But now let's try to hack these kind of things and see what happens if I change to final this variable. As you know, the final attributes are attributes that should be initialized, let's say, as fast as possible or when you declare them or in the class in a constructor. Otherwise, you cannot use them because a final variable is similar to a constant. Of course, if it's a constant, it shouldn't be changed, or you should provide a default value. Or you provide here, let's say something like 7, and you cannot change it in the future. If you don't provide a value here, Java will expect to be this value for this variable inside the constructor. Now, what happens if we have more than one constructor? And we can see here, let's call again this one, but even before call you can see that there is already errors here. What he's saying is that you cannot use this x here, and this is because Java has this rule that you cannot use a variable unless you made sure that it was initialized before. You cannot use an initialized variable. So, but in this case, let's comment to see what happens. Maybe the problem it's this system out, and we can initialize here x and y here and use it, and it's okay, but you cannot, but Java knows that this x was already initialized, so you cannot reinitialize it again in another constructor. This is the main constructor. This happened here. You cannot change it, and it knows that this x was initialized here. But let's confirm that this is the case. Imagine that I comment this line here, and this is a very interesting thing. Even if I comment here, which means that shouldn't be an error here because I'm not initializing the variable here, but I'm still initializing my attribute in another constructor. In this chaining, I'm playing with both constructors like as if they were one, but for Java, they don't behave as one. There should always be one constructor, which is the main one when the things happen. And when you do this chaining here to this and delegate to this constructor the initialization, you should put everything here to initialize at least these kind of things like the final and this required information. And you can see if I put the mouse hover, it said you should initialize the field X in constructor. Even if I'm initializing it here, Java doesn't care because this constructor delegated the initialization to this one. So it should be this one to initialize it. I have to initialize it like this, and I cannot do this put this X here and this constructor, and this is compile time. It's not because it's not because of this line. Java doesn't care if I'm calling this constructor or this constructor. He wants to make sure that only one of constructors, the final one in the chaining in this case, is the one that will be responsible to initialize the variable. And you can also say, but maybe I can initialize before this. You cannot, right? As I said before, any line before the this. So to make this work, you have to remove this X from here, and you cannot put another. You can change the Y here because it's not final. You can change whenever you want, but initializing a final attribute, you have to initialize it in the end of the chain of the constructors. If you don't have a chain, you choose one constructor. You can put the initialization here or here. There will be no problem. But if you have chaining, it should be always the final constructor in the chain. Thank you for listener. I'll see you in the next video.